Hi everybody! This talk will be about the colors we associate with complex emotional states, such as nostalgia, or our feelings during the lockdown of the COVID-19 pandemic. Color emotion associations are conveyed through many media, such as in Disney's movie Inside Out, shown here. And there's also ample scientific evidence that colors are systematically associated with specific emotions. In a recent study, we found that color emotion associations are strongly determined by lightness and saturation. Saturation describes how colorful a color is. So desaturated colors are basically grayish. And in contrast to previous studies, we had equated lightness and saturation across hue, as illustrated in the lower diagram here. We measured color associations with happiness and anger. The results suggested that positive emotions tend to be associated with light and saturated colors. We'll call emotional valence the degree to which emotions are positive or negative. Now, the big question is where these associations come from and maybe what they are for. One possibility is that color emotion associations are culturally defined through language and media, and people learn such semantic associations by heart. So, for example, they would learn that happy goes with yellow, sad goes with blue, etc. Alternatively, there may be regularities in the way we experience color and emotions, in the sense that one is more likely to get certain emotions in contexts that involves particular colors. For example, Jonas Kaite and colleagues found that the association between joy and yellow was related to the positive experience of the sun. So if color emotion associations are grounded in experience, they should not be bound to explicitly mentioning specific concepts or words. To investigate this idea, my students and I examined color associations in which emotional implications are more complex and thus less obvious. We conducted 3 studies. The first one was about the color people associate with nostalgia. Nostalgia often involves objects and fashions from the past. The color of such objects and fashions are shaped by the media and also branding and marketing. So it's likely that a large part of the idea of nostalgia is influenced by cultural, arbitrary associations between colors and vintage objects and fashion. However, if color nostalgia associations are grounded in our color and emotion experience, we should expect that the color of nostalgia is related to the basic emotions for which color associations are firmly established. In online surveys, we first asked participants to rate between 0 and 100 how much each color matches the idea of nostalgia. We then asked them to complete questionnaires about nostalgia valence. Nostalgia valence simply indicates how positive participants judge nostalgia. A first survey involved German participants and these colors here. The diagram illustrates ratings averaged across participants, and the colors of the bars indicate the stimulus colors. The bars are sorted by the ratings, which are shown along the y-axis, so Germans most strongly associated desaturated yellow, beige, and teal with nostalgia, and least magenta, turquoise, and yellow. We got different results in a second survey with a British group of observers here on the right. They rated light blue, purple, and pink as most nostalgic. We then calculated the principal component that represents the systematic differences across observers. The lower row here shows how each color contributes to individual differences. So basically, there are some observers that tend to associate grayscale colors with nostalgia, here on the left pole of the principal component. And others associated rather saturated colors with nostalgia, such as pink, turquoise, and orange on the right here. And this contrast between grayscale and saturated colors across individuals was very similar in both cultures. We also double-checked, or if you like, triple-checked, These results were the third study and a different set of colors. And again, individual differences mainly varied in whether they associated nostalgia with grayscale or saturated colors. In all three cases, there was a clear correlation between the principal component and the saturation of the colors. Finally, we found in all three surveys that individual differences in color ratings were related to nostalgia valence. In the bottom row, the y-axis indicates the scores of the principal components of the color choices. These principal component scores indicate the location of each individual choice along the principal component that I showed you in the second row there. We also determined the nostalgia valence based on the 4 questions I had introduced to you. And the nostalgia valence is shown along the x-axis there. In all 3 surveys, you can see that there were correlations that indicated that participants who had a more positive judgment of nostalgia also chose colors towards the colorful end of the principal component. In a second approach, we conducted a survey about the colors people associate with lockdown. Again, it might be that people just learned to associate certain lockdown-related concepts with colors, such as red for the illustration of the coronavirus that was mostly used at that time, or blue for the British health system, or white for doctors. Alternatively, the color of lockdown may be related to the emotions people experience during that time, for example, with sadness, boredom, and loneliness. We asked participants to identify 3 colors they associate with their life during lockdown, and later on, they also answered questions about their feelings during lockdown, such as those on the right side here. And here are the results. This diagram shows the most frequently chosen colors. So apparently, participants mainly associated saturated colors with COVID, most notably yellow and blue. For comparison, we had also asked participants to indicate colors they associate with the time before lockdown and with childhood. Yellow seems to be important for all 3 situations, but there are also marked differences across time points, for example, for dark gray and blue here. However, as before, we find that observers differed in all 3 cases in whether they chose saturated or desaturated grayscale colors. Here, lightness also played some role in individual differences, but less so than colorfulness. Again, those individual differences depended on how positive participants felt about the time before and during lockdown and about their childhood. Finally, we examined color preferences rather than color associations. Color preference refers to how much people like a color compared to other colors. We examined whether the color preferences are indicative about their mood and mental health. Color preferences were measured through ratings here on the left, and the question about mood here on the right targeted the emotional state of participants at the very moment when they completed the survey. We also asked a whole range of questions about mental health and well-being, but I will not go into detail about these questions here because they did not yield any interesting results. The most interesting results concerned the relationship between color preferences and mood. This diagram illustrates color preferences of our participants. It's a very typical result in that bluish colors were very much liked, while greenish-brown colors here were disliked. This pattern is already well known from previous measurements of color preferences. We then calculated the principal component of individual differences. Like with color associations before, the main systematic difference across observers was whether people preferred saturated or grayscale colors. And finally, these individual differences in color preference were related to the individual's mood. The correlation between color preferences and mood valence is illustrated in the bottom diagram. It implies that the saturation of preferred colors expresses how positive or well participants felt when completing the survey. Although these are different measurements, this pattern is very similar to the ones for color associations with nostalgia and lockdown. In sum, we observed that individual differences in color nostalgia associations, in color lockdown and color childhood associations, and in color preferences depended on emotional valence. This was the case even though the emotional valence played a different role in all our studies. The trend was also not dazzling strong, but consistent, showing that positive emotions tended to be associated with light and saturated colors. These observations are in line with those for simple associations between colors and concepts of basic emotions, such as happiness, sadness, and anger. From our studies, we take that such associations can also be evoked when such concepts of basic emotions are not explicitly mentioned. And this speaks for the idea that these color-emotion associations are not simply learned associations between concepts, but seem to be grounded in the way we experience color and emotions throughout our life. And conversely, we can consider whether color can be used as an implicit measure of emotional valence when it is difficult to ask people about their true feelings. That's it. Thank you very much for watching. Bye.